All right, back, part 2, ready?
Yeah, indeed.
After saying that part 1 would be really brief, and I think I made it longer, let's a little bit quicker.
Righty-ho.
All right, so this is part 2 of our essential glossary, in our opinion, of terms for exercise professionals working with older people. Previously, in this glossary, we mentioned, just flashed up some screen grabs here from some of the speakers and topics, sessions for our learning week, which was really the catalyst for this brief verbal glossary. These were the terms that we talked about in part 1, and now we're going to talk about these terms. Still in the theme, just to kind of get our heads around, we're still in context of older people, still in context of a strength and balance continuum leading into evidence-based programs to reduce falls. But there's something much bigger and broader than structured exercise, isn't there? There's something else. Yes. So let's dive in with inactivity. Go.
So officially, inactivity just means that you don't meet the physical activity guidelines for your particular age group. So you're inactive, and that obviously has a broad range.
Which is a lot of people.
Most. Across the whole age range, actually. And despite all the years of constant reminders to people about being active, it hasn't gone up much at all. In fact, of course, it's dropped during COVID as well. So inactivity just means you're not meeting the physical activity guidelines. And a quick reminder of those for older adults is that they should be active daily and moving about daily. That's the main and important one. They should build on their light activities, so they do as much light activity as possible because there's a strong link with physical function there. They should attempt to do 2 lots of strengthening activity every week, and they should look also at doing 2 lots of balance activity every week. That's actually been put into one guideline, so multi-component strength and balance activity with some flexibility at least twice a week. And they're also tasked to try and aim for 150 minutes of moderate physical activity. So that's activity that makes them slightly warmer or slightly out of breath. And of course, to try and reduce their sedentary behaviour. And on to sedentary behaviour, I guess you're going to...
Having said that, I'm not going to make this any longer. Something I'm going to crowbar in here. We just touched very, very briefly on strength definition in part 1. And you mentioned there the Chief Medical Officer guidelines, physical activity guidelines for older people, updated 2018 or 19?
19.
19.
Well, they were updated 2018, published December 2018, very quietly. And then
from 2011, wasn't it, the first one?
Big, long wait for that.
I guess it's suffice to say that as exercise professionals, we should know that these guidelines exist, of course. I just wanted to mention, you mentioned strength on 2 days a week, but of course, strength is relative, and in context of frailty, a tin of beans might be enough, but the chances are it's not going to be enough. So when I'd ever seen these exercise videos and then we're saying grab a tin of beans, we're going to do some strength. Let's just be clear, it might not be strength. Just saying that. Just wanted to say that.
You'll only know if it's a strengthening activity if your muscles shake, are tense, or almost you have to give up doing the thing. So, the muscles are going, hey, do I really have to? That's strengthening activity. And for some, that's a tin of baked beans, and for others, it's a massive weight.
Depends on why we've included physical literacy in this glossary.
Yes, absolutely.
See, it's all knitting together. Anyway, after rudely interrupting you, because you did have a great link from inactivity to sedentary behaviour. Go on then. So sedentary behaviour, please, go.
There is an official definition for sedentary behaviour. It's not inactivity. Sedentary behaviour is any time when you're awake where you are lying or sitting down and your energy expenditure is under 1.5 METs. So what I mean by that is that you could, of course, be doing floor-based exercise. So that's lying down, but you're doing more than 1.5 METs, we hope, in whatever activity you're doing. So that's not sedentary behaviour. You could be doing a seated exercise class. So you're sitting, but your METs are hopefully above 1.5 METs. So sedentary behaviour is any time in the waking day, so it doesn't count sleeping, you're allowed to sleep, where you are not using any energy. And unfortunately, we now know that even if you meet the physical activity guidelines, which, as we know, very few people do, if they are sedentary in between, so they pat themselves back because they've done their 2, 3, 4 times a week class, but then they sit the rest of the time thinking, I've done my bit of physical activity, I've met my guidelines, I'm going to sit and watch this box set for 4 hours now, or I'm going to play my card game or knit or whatever it is they do. They are actually less healthy than those people that fidget in between. So so sedentary behavior has an independent effect on our muscles, our cardiovascular system, our flexibility, mood, independent effect from the activity that we do. So we should be trying to reduce the total amount of sedentary behaviour, or if we can't, because frailer older people often don't have the energy to break up their sitting a lot during the day, then we need to at least break it up as often as possible. Sit to stands in a very frail older person are actually improved function, but also they vastly reduce the effect of sedentary behaviour. So breaking up sitting once an hour is a starting place for someone who's frailer. It won't make a huge difference to someone who's already going to a class 3 times a week, but the moving about and reducing that prolonged period will have a beneficial effect on health over and above the actual exercise sessions they're doing as well.
Breaking up these long periods of sitting are critical, crucial, vital, and perhaps a missing link in some of the other educational messages that we as instructors are deploying and imparting.
It's so important that just because they might turn up at your once a week class doesn't mean everything's good. In between, they need to be moving more. And regularly, and then the effect of the class, and they'll put it down to the sessions they're coming to, even though it's their general physical activity. But if they increase their physical activity outside of the sessions they're coming to, their improvements would be so much quicker and faster, and therefore their adherence would be better. So it pays all of us to educate people to understand it's not just coming in once a week to a class. You've got to change your habits, and changing your habits changes your health.
So this sit less, move more message, of course, applies to all ages and healthy regular gym goers that maybe sat at their PCs, zoom in for hours on end.
Yes.
But also you mentioned there people attending structured exercise sessions, which are probably via Zoom in the current kind of landscape, as it were. But for those people who are really at that lower threshold of function, that, as you say, may not have the energy or the motivation or the know-how or the means to access IT Zoom sessions. We talk a lot, certainly at LLT, about communication and engagement. This could be as simple as a phone call and a paper copy of some kind of movement or exercise. But this perhaps is that very start point, isn't it? To move out of that sedentary behaviour, breaking up long periods on that journey towards moving more in structured exercise. It's the start point, isn't it? And yeah. I think perhaps we're missing so many opportunities. And I suppose as well, all the kind of findings and readings on social media and Facebook pages at the moment, there are lots of PTs, personal trainers out there working with younger, healthy people that have parents and grandparents. So there's a massive opportunity, isn't there? Like spin-offs to what we might be doing, because we've just got to get that message in somewhere. We can't underestimate it, I guess, is the short way of saying it. It's a huge message, isn't it?
It's massive. And to give another indication of that, I'm an exercise physiologist. I know the benefit of structured exercise over and above physical activity, believe me. But for many people that can't access, even irrespective of COVID, that can't access or won't access group sessions, regular movement can change completely change their physical and mental health. And we've seen this in Make Movement Your Mission, where we've had some people who join us 3 times a day for just that quick 15 minutes. It's not high intensity exercise. There's nothing in it that you might go, wow, that's going to change that function. That's going to change. It's movement. It's movement, regular movement, and crowbarring in throughout the day. But some of the feedback we've had has been spectacular. I mean, I would be proud to get that in a structured exercise program. Some of the comments we've had back on things that they've been able to do again, that they'd lost the ability to do, the effect on mood, on having that regular movement 3 times a day. So here I'm not just talking about 3 times a week or sending out a home exercise program to do 3 lots of half an hour. It's about moving throughout the day, but also you really captured it as well. It's about keeping contact, because the very fact that they can tell us these benefits eggs them on to do more. We can constantly prompt and say, well, that's fantastic, and look at the difference that's made, and everyone's reading it. So we're improving their physical literacy by having that regular contact with them throughout the day.
Which brings us on to physical literacy. And I think certainly, I'm sure I'm not only speaking for myself, this is a term that I think we're hearing more so now, perhaps due to the pandemic, perhaps because people are thinking differently or prioritizing kind of movement and physical activity more. And all this in the same way that we need to we learn, don't we, to read and write, the literacy bit. The more we can empower people to understand how movement, how structured exercise should feel, how strength training should feel, to understand that it's normal and usual to feel a bit breathless. This is light activity. You're not going to get stronger unless you're feeling this in your muscles. This is what we mean by physical literacy, isn't it? Our own understanding of our physical self.
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
Well, it's also about self. Tell you all about that. There's an official definition, which I'll give to start with, but then I'll expand on a bit, I think. So physical literacy is the motivation, confidence, physical competence, knowledge and understanding to value and take responsibility for engagement in physical activities for life.
What's the reference for that, please?
That's actually the International Physical Literacy Association from May 2014.
Okay.
But they vary a little bit. There's been a great paper by Bones on physical literacy in older adults. But essentially, there's a couple of things I want to pull out there. It's understanding and valuing that knowledge and taking responsibility for their own engagement in physical activity throughout their life. So people are more likely to be motivated to be regularly active if they understand why it's important, not just someone's telling them to do it, but what does it mean for them, for their goals, for their interests. Physical competence is important because someone who is chair bound and can't get out of a chair without with 2 people is going to be severely limited in their physical ability and their physical activities because they rely on someone else to help. But almost everybody else that can actually manage to get out of their chair or to do things in a chair without someone else helping, we know that the self-management of so many medical conditions, of mood, so many things are made better if we move more. And for them to understand that means that they're more likely to take responsibility for their own self-management. Again, really key in these times of COVID, where they're not just being picked up, taken to a class, dropped off again, but it's beyond that, and it's something about moving in their everyday life. And the feedback we've had from Make Movement Your Mission on people actually understanding why is a warm-up important, what it does to the muscles, to getting the oxygen to the different places in the body, why is flexibility done when you're warm. Getting that understanding means that they're more likely to do it later when you're not about. So it's motivation, it's confidence to do it when you're not about, and that's all in how we impart that information to them, and in a way that they can absorb and that they can understand and they can ask questions and feedback. Physical competency is vital for adherence and therefore for future outcomes.
Can I just tag in something on there? Because I can't help myself. In my head, I've got a Chinese proverb, and somehow I'm gonna knit them together. This Chinese proverb to something that is really, really, I think, critical to our close to our hearts at LLT, which is this practical skills, this education, this physical literacy is in our hands. We have a captive audience. And the Chinese proverb link is, we can give people the fish, we can demo stuff and go, here it is, copy me. Or we can say, okay, I can teach you how to get so many more of these fish. So during this demo, I'm going to tell you about this, this, and this. In fact, I'm going to stop demoing and I'm going to communicate to you, be that on a two-way or even a one-way. I'm going to help you understand, because as part of one of my learning outcomes from my session is, what do I want people to learn from me so that they can catch their own fish? That was my Chinese proverb versus exercise instruction. Just thought, why give people a fish when we can teach them how to catch their own? That's my analogy for physical literacy. Should we move on?
Absolutely lovely. Why not?
Anyway, I guess we can't finish without talking about this NEAT thing. And it seems to me, a personal opinion, shameless personal opinion, this is being talked about like the new thing, and it's not really new. It's everything.
It's light physical activity. If you want to just give it its real name, it's light physical activity. So in that old idea of sedentary behaviour, light activity, moderate activity, vigorous, and the benefits to health will increase the more you move up that pathway. NEAT is something that got lost because of the original physical activity guidelines, where all the emphasis was put on moderate and vigorous physical activity. And many people read that, if you go back a long time, 5 times 30 minutes, or you come for the more recent 150 minutes. If that's the first thing they read and it's so far off what they do, they did nothing, because it was just too far away. And yet we now know that there is a dose response, and it is the non-exercise activity things we do throughout the day, pottering, meandering to the shop, doing a bit of tidying in the house, walking up and down your stairs a couple of times, but not for 10 minutes. All these things that make a massive difference, especially to older adults. I mean, in fact, there's a body of research to suggest that it's actually the light or the NEAT activities they do in between their moderate stuff that makes the difference to hospital admissions, GP prescriptions, and GP attendances. So let's stop giving this constant focus on moderate. Unless someone's doing that already, then yes, great. Well, let's increase the amount they're doing, and let's try and get someone who's not doing it to try it a little bit. But if we constantly go on about these 150 minutes and it's so far away for the vast majority of people, they stop listening. The value of these light activities and the volume of those that you do throughout the day to an older person is immeasurable, and it's something that we should be pushing beyond. I think the moderate and the vigorous intensity guidelines for the vast majority of older adults any of us will work with are quite a long way away from what they're currently doing, and it should all be about being active regularly throughout the day, trying to do something that gets you a bit warmer or out of breath for as long as you can. Don't forget the 10 minutes minimum bout that was in the original 2011 guidelines was also dropped, because you don't have to do moderate activities for
now
10
every
minutes.
minute counts, right?
A lot of, so I would agree this is a new fad, calling it NEAT, but it's something we've always had. We just lost focus on it completely. And now, thank God, it's come back into our consciousness. And we should see beyond our structured exercise sessions to what NEAT activities they're doing. So in that pre-exercise assessment, it's not just how often do you go to a class, how often do you get out of breath or warmer. It's what do you do in your everyday? What do you get out and about to do? What do you do in the house? Because then we get an idea of what NEAT activities they're currently doing, and potentially can use those, number 1 as goals, number 2 as motivation points, but number 3 to try and increase the volume of those outside of our sessions.
Not just about the session, is it? This physical liturgy, again, for me, it's our responsibility. Who else is going to give that to people? So if we want to reduce inactivity, increase be more physically active, reduce and break up sedentary behaviours. That only comes from physical literacy, doesn't it?
And do you know what? People, from my experience, and I'm sure yours is exactly the same, people value you more as an instructor if you impart that information. You become much more of an expert rather than just the person to turn up to that's going to blow their whistle and I'll follow them in that direction. Yeah. It builds a lovely bond, which therefore will help with longer term adherence, loyalty, all those sorts of things. But more importantly, it's so important for the older person you work with, and we need to respect them.
We talk about the why all the time, certainly at LLT, in on our practical delivery on our courses. You know, if we're not telling people why we're doing something, we need to question why. So we're not just demonstrators of stuff. We are educators and motivators to empower people to learn and to take that learning into their days. I can feel a part 3 coming on, but for now, let's just leave it there.
Let's move a bit longer part 2, shall we?
When you're talking about moderate and vigorous and the values of light, HIT came into my mind as well. There's a lot of stuff around HIT. Maybe we need to bust some HIT myths, but not now. So thank you for part 2. Needless to say, again, all this to give some context. If you've enjoyed how you've heard us chatting about this, people out there watching this is the kind of information, the kind of delivery, and the kind of stuff that you're going to get from all of the speakers, all of the expert speakers in their field at our Learning Week. Quality information from the research, but implemented, practically applied, and applicable to anyone who's delivering exercise to older people. Thank you very much. Maybe see you there. Thank you very much, Dawn. Bye for now. See you in part 3, maybe.
See ya.